right, guys, welcome back. This is the third and final segment of this episode, and it's just kind of like a little love letter to one of my favorite. It's not really a genre.
Subgenre, maybe?
Yeah, it's more like a level structure, commonly referred to as Metroidvania, which I'm not a huge fan of that name, but it is.
Yeah, I meant to ask you that.
It's
because that's just combining Metroid and Castlevania, right?
It's literally taking the word Metroid and then putting Vania on the end of it, which is removed from Castlevania.
But dude, I didn't really notice till after I heard you start saying it more that a lot of people in the industry use that term for these games. So
well, there's no other way to describe it. Because it's a unique level format, the unique world format, that there has to be a way to describe it, because when you start making a game in this style, you intentionally do it. It's not just like something that happens along the way or something like that. You go out and you say, I'm going to make a game like this. But when looking up information about this, like the history of it and everything, there was a wiki article somewhere that mentioned that it's also sometimes referred to as Castleoids.
Castleoids?
Yeah, the Castleoid genre.
Oh, wow.
So Castle.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of like Metroidvania a little better, maybe.
Yeah, all of a sudden Metroidvania doesn't seem that bad. But, so anyway, this is one of my favorite ways to structure a video game. I'm probably going to accidentally call it a genre a couple times during this, but it's not actually a genre because it doesn't define like the style of play. A lot of these are typically platformers that have a level structure that can be classified as Metroidvania. Just for a history lesson, the origins of this literally go back to the original Metroid game back in 1986. And around that same time, a few Castlevania games were coming out, Castlevania Vampire Killer and Simon's Quest, that followed a very similar structure. And that structure is gating your progress within a world by collecting upgrades and items in order to open up new areas. And so generally speaking, these games they allow you to explore freely from wherever you start. Like, up until that point, side-scroller games were, literally linear experiences where you go in one direction for the entire game and then it's over. But these games allowed you to go back and forth. So you'd move forward, you'd reach a roadblock, you'd go back to try to figure out what's going on. Maybe you'd find a different pathway that led to an upgrade that then let you progress to the next area. That was very much what the structure of Metroid was and these early Castlevania games. And then in 1994, Super Metroid came out, which is when people really talk about getting inspired by this genre or this level design, this is the one that they're talking about, because this is the game that established the template. These older games had certain things in it, but this Super Metroid is what set the standard for all of these games moving forward, pretty much. Then, of course, in 97, you had Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is the famous Koji Igarashi cult classic Castlevania game that, took this similar template and just made a better one of those. And he's gone on now to start his Kickstarter for Bloodstained, which is going to be, like a spiritual successor in a lot of ways to these, mid-90s Castlevania games that he helped, put on the map. Of course, now Castlevania has kind of gone in a different direction. Like the Lords of Shadow series is not that style. It's very much like sort of like God of War style.
I was gonna say, isn't it more like hack and slashing?
Yeah. It's all combo based, like God of War or Devil May Cry. It doesn't really have. I mean, there is some exploration elements there, but it's nothing substantial, that's for sure. Which is kind of sad because I'd like to see them go back to that. But see, this is kind of the interesting thing. The last big AAA game that really had these elements in it was Metroid Prime, which was more or less a first-person remake of Super Metroid, and a lot of in like the way that the levels formed and the story and everything like that is very reminiscent of that. And of course, that came out on the GameCube, and
very groundbreaking,
extremely groundbreaking to take what it's like one of the first times that and Nintendo's been the one to do it right along, is take a mostly 2D experience and translate it over to 3D.
Yeah.
They did it with Ocarina of Time, they did it with Mario, and then they finally did it with Metroid in 2002. And you can understand why that would probably be one of the more difficult ones to, translate over successfully anyway.
Especially going into first person from a 2D platformer type thing.
Yeah, because a lot of one key feature of these games is you always have a map, because you need to figure out where you are pretty much, because a lot of it has to do with you coming upon something and then realizing you can't access it. So then you have to remember where that is. Which is probably one of the reasons why I like it so much, is because it allows you, it makes you be more attentive to the environment.
Yeah.
Whereas with a linear experience, you're just going through. Yeah,
you're not really paying attention. You're just kind of,
Yeah. So maybe you'll notice some cool stuff here or there, but for the most part, you're just going to the next fight or whatever the situation is. So they were able to translate that into first person expertly, in my opinion. And this was actually maybe one of my... So I played Metroid Prime really around when it came out, believe it or not. And this was actually probably one of my first introductions to this format.
Yep.
And at the time, I didn't even realize what it was. I just thought it was a really cool game.
Yeah.
And then I'd go on and I'd play the next game I have on this list, this is where we get an interesting divide here, where AAA games stopped doing this format.
Yeah.
And then in 2009, there's probably some games in there that I missed, and people are probably going to be mad at me for that. But the most popular one that I found was Shadow Complex, which came out in 2009. And this was one of the first Summer of Arcade Xbox 360 titles that came out. And, it was a big deal because it was published by Epic. That's, Gears of War, Unreal Tournament fame, and developed by a new studio called Chair, which has gone on to make the Infinity Blade games, which make a ton of money on mobile platforms. These were the first games that you could see 3D graphics on phones and everything like that.
Yeah.
So they ended up being very popular. But they made this was their first game, and it was in that style. It wasn't fantastical like Castlevania or sci-fi like Metroid. It was more modern. It was just like a modern action adventure setting where you are a guy exploring this complex that turns out to be like a underground military base that may have terrorist things going on in it, and you have to stop it. But it had some futuristic stuff in it, like the weapons and things like that. The next game that I found that I've picked out here is a game called Outland, which came out in 2011 by Housemarque, which is now famous for Resogun, which was one of the launch titles on PlayStation 4. And they also did a game called Dead Nation, which seemed to be pretty popular too, but I'd never heard of it.
It's a pretty popular title. Yeah.
Yeah. So this game has a very unique aesthetic. It's mostly all silhouettes, but your character and certain things in the world have glowing lights on them, so it adds an accent to everything that's going on. But when you look at this particular game, it's reminiscent very much so of Metroid. So when you picked up new abilities in Metroid, there was this presentation of these new abilities that is just as much of a cornerstone of them as any other part of them, where they're on an altar, or you there's a statue or something, and it's presented like the gods are bringing it down to you or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's the way you feel when you pick them up too, because it's like
you accomplish.
Yeah,
something.
you accomplish something. Then all of a sudden you're going through your mind. Oh, where can I use this? Where can I use this? Where do I go next? Where do I go next?
Yeah, kind of like this whole thing you've already been through. Suddenly it's like all new again.
Yeah,
it's like now like I can look at the whole level in a different light because now I got tools to
Exactly.
Yep.
And you get that feeling over and over and over again, which is what I really like about these games.
It's a constant feeling of accomplishment and discovery. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like a linear game, you get that too by like completing the story or getting major plot points or whatever the case may be. But this is more like you're interested in going back to the old places. So in a lot of ways, I can understand why people wouldn't like what could contribute to like backtracking. But because you have these new abilities, just so many more things are open to you. So over the main reason why I wanted to really talk about this is because of the last year and a half, we've seen a huge resurgence of these games in both a independent and more higher profile experiences. So, Drew, you said you just recently picked up Darksiders.
Yeah.
And you were excited to experience that. So Darksiders, the original actually came out quite a few years ago.
Yeah, I think it said like 09.
Yeah. That's quite a while ago. That is so that game isn't just a Metroidvania style game.
Well, it's a lot of different.
It's a lot of different types of games. In fact, when it came out, it was kind of the joke was like it's literally every single game mixed combined.
You're talking about the first one?
Yeah, the first one. The second one's similar, but I don't think it's quite as obvious how many things they're just throwing into it. But that doesn't mean it's bad. I actually really enjoyed that game. They did a good job of blending all of the elements together.
Yep.
But the world structure is built like a Metroidvania game. In fact, I'd say it was built just as much as a Metroidvania game as it is a Zelda game.
Yeah.
Which there are a lot of similarities in these level structures, where Zelda's a little bit more linear. Like you're not revisiting the same places quite as much as you are in like Metroid or something like that. But you are like being able to explore new places when you acquire new equipment.
Yeah, which is kind of the same thing, just not going back to the same place.
Yeah, it's kind of, but
I know what you're
Zelda
saying.
has the overworld too, so like you get that new equipment, and then all of a sudden you can move that rock and see what's behind it or something like that.
Yep.
And that's kind of like what Darksiders is quite a bit. But there are certain areas that you can go back to and get quite substantial things like treasure chests and upgrades and things like that. So I would say Darksiders 2 actually is more in the Metroidvania vein because there's more to do in that game. There's more reason to go back to different areas.
Yeah, the first one, like from what I've seen, it seems like it's more like taking place in like a city, like cities and stuff. Like
so that
like you don't have to like
Yeah,
I'm gonna get into it soon, but
I'm not gonna get too much into the story. But yeah, it does take place on Earth.
Yeah,
and there's
because it's like a conflict between heaven and hell.
Yeah,
and all
yeah,
that.
exactly. It's something happens.
Yeah.
There's a conflict, and Earth gets caught in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And that's where a majority of that game takes place, is like a decimated Earth.
Yeah,
but it goes off in more fantastical directions as you go through it. I think you end up going like into the underworld at some point. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it.
But like it's Darksiders 2, that's actually one of my favorite games, like of all time.
Yep.
It took everything that Darksiders 1 did and just made it so much bigger and capitalized on everything. And I would say it's more of a Metroidvania because of the fact that you're always finding secrets you can't access until you get that special piece of equipment that allows you to double jump or a grappling hook or something like that. So then there's actually, I want to mention a game called Apotheon that came out on PS4 and PC a little last year. And this was a game similar to that. This had more of a Greek mythology aesthetic. Very similar to Outland, actually, where there was like really bright, vibrant accents to all the characters and objects and everything like that. I haven't quite dived into this game yet, but from what I understand, a lot of people enjoyed it and thought it was a really good one of those. Another game that came out last year that I was able to play quite a bit of was Axial Verge.
Yeah, I heard some good stuff about that too.
That came out on PC and PS4, and this is actually developed by one guy. One guy made this entire game. He did all the music. He did
that's
all
crazy.
the level design. It's if there's a game that follows this template, specifically, it's Axial Verge. If you play this game, you'll be like, wow, this guy played a bunch of Super Metroid and decided to make one of those. Like, make a Super Metroid for today. I mean, it goes off in a couple different directions, but even the graphical aesthetic is reminiscent of those older games. Like, it's kind of like pixel arty and looks like it would be able to play on like a Super Nintendo. And then we also had, I got to mention, Rise of the Tomb Raider came out this year, and that, surprisingly enough, had a Metroidvania structure to the way its open world sections were built, where you'd come across something and it'd be like, you can't open this until you have the rope arrow. So then when you get that rope arrow, you're like, I got to go back to all these places because I got to know what's inside this thing.
Yeah, yep.
And I think that's a really awesome way to get you to be interested in a genre that up until this point was extremely linear.
Yeah.
Like, the first Tomb Raider reboot game was very linear. You could go back, but there wasn't quite as much of a draw to it.
They introduced that style to an extent in the first one,
Yeah.
but you can tell they definitely like went all in for the new one.
Yeah, they went all in for it. And like the Uncharted games doesn't have much
those
of that
are,
either.
Those are like linear.
Yeah, straight on linear experiences. So yeah, I think that's cool, especially with a game like Rise of the Tomb Raider that's gorgeous. So you want to go back to these places and see them again, and then explore them a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
But the real reason I'm talking about this is because of Ori and the Blind Forest, which came out early last year on Xbox One and PC. And in my mind, this is my favorite one of these games. It had the world structure of the Metroidvania, where you were acquiring new abilities to access new areas. You combine that with just absolutely gorgeous art, like hand-drawn. You got to see it to believe it. With these things, I always show gameplay, so there'll definitely be some gameplay of that. You can see what's going on there. But what really did it for me was the emphasis on the perfectly balanced platforming that made you... So most of these games have some sort of platforming element, but they're not hugely expanded upon. It's like jumping puzzles or, grappling hooks and stuff like that. But what this did was make it fun to go around these levels, to travel them, because, with these games, you're backtracking and walking through the same areas over and over again.
Yeah.
So sometimes that does get a little tedious, especially if you're going back pretty far. But what this game did was make just the act of traveling in the game fun by giving you abilities like the slingshot that also allows you to lock onto an enemy projectile and then shoot yourself off in another direction. And you have triple jumps in this thing that allows you to hold on to the side of a wall and then blast yourself out in the other direction to access new areas. And, these are all things you acquire as you play the game. So every time you pick one up, you're like, oh, now I can access that area that I was trying to get to before. And it did such a good job of putting things like just out of reach. Like you'd jump and you'd double jump and you'd be like, oh, come on, I'm almost there. And then, when you get that upgrade, you knew immediately. You're like,
I'm going back to that.
Yeah. I know that gives me enough to get onto that platform or to get into that room or bust down those things that are blocking my path or something like that. And that is like at the core of what I like about these games. And that game just took the formula and added just enough of its own twist to bring it to the next level, in my opinion.
So it made it feel fresh at the same time, retro, classic.
Exactly, because it was as a platformer, that game would have stood on its own.
Yeah.
Like if it was just a linear experience because it's really tough platforming. I mean,
I've heard
it
can get. I've heard it. I give you credit because I've heard of a lot of people giving up on that game.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people complaining about it too. There's specifically three sequences in that game that require pixel perfect platforming.
Yeah.
And if you just don't have the patience for it, because you're not going to do it right the first time, so you're going to have to die, respawn. And I understand that a lot of people feel that loses a lot of the momentum, and I can definitely see how people would feel about that. But I just pushed through it because I was having so much fun with it that even when you failed and had to redo it, you felt like you were, accomplishing something.
Yeah, instead of being frustrated, you're like, all right,
yeah,
I'll get this. I got this.
Because every time you'd get a little bit farther.
Yeah.
There'd be a couple of times where it'd be like you're banging your head against the wall on one particular thing, but usually you're making just a little bit more progress. So then when you finally do it, your heart's racing and you're like, yeah.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and then the way that the game presents itself with the art style and music and everything just makes it feel like your excitement that you're feeling inside yourself is being displayed on screen.
Yeah, and not many games can say that. So
yeah, not there's games. Some games do it better than others, but this game just really clicked for me, and I was so happy to experience that this year. I would really look forward to what this team does moving forward. If they're going to do a sequel, if they're going to do a different game, I don't know, but they're definitely people to keep your eye on. That was Moon Studios, by the way.
No, I'm glad they got the respect and accolades they deserved.
Yeah,
because
it showed up on a lot of people's lists this year.
Yep.
For Game of the Year, and not necessarily number one, but somewhere in the middle, which is I think pretty good, especially for an indie game. It seemed
to be in the top 10 quite a bit.
Yeah.
Between that and Rocket League and a couple others.
A couple other indie games.
There were some good hits this year. So.
Yeah. I want to bring this back around to a game that's going to be releasing soon at the end of January called Slain. Slain I say it like that because it has an exclamation point on the end.
It's very critical.
Yes, it's very important. It's exclaiming. This game is very much in the vein of Metroidvania. I think it has some RPG elements as well, and I'm definitely going to be checking that out when it comes out. It's coming out on PC right now. I think that's the only version it's announced for. But this makes me happy to see that this torch is still being lit, still carrying into this year, because last year was so great for it that there were so many great examples of how this level structure can be done well that I'm happy to see 2016 starting out with another one. And it looks for in terms of vibe, let's call it, style, it looks more like Castlevania than Metroid. Like you look like you're some sort of guy with a sword running around these very dark gothic levels.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're familiar with these games and you go back to Super Metroid, you feel right at home.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this is exactly what these games are doing today. It may not be as pretty, or you may be fumbling with the controls a little bit because it may not be as responsive depending on if you're playing on an emulator or something like that. But the way the levels unfold, the way that you explore the area is the same as what these games are doing today. And yeah, I think it's great that you can track a lineage all the way back to its like unique starting point.
Yeah, definitely.
And see like, oh yeah, that's the same. All right, well that's gonna wrap up my love letter here, to Metroidvania games, or Castleoids. I'm not gonna call it Castleoids. I'm gonna still call them Metroidvania games until something else comes along that describes it better. Maybe I'll call them Slains after Slain comes out.
Yeah, we'll see if Slain can hold up the torch here.
You're gonna know because I'm gonna play this game and I'm gonna let you know if it
If it sucks,
meets
we're
my
going to hear a
expectations.
rant.
Yeah, oh yeah, you'll definitely. But if it's really great, you'll hear Ori and the Blind Forest levels of enthusiasm. So,
Nice.
So that's going to wrap it up for this podcast. I hope you enjoyed the new structure we're doing. We'll be back next time with all sorts of different topics. We're going to try to come up with some new stuff. Make sure you look to the YouTube channel for some interesting content. We're mixing it up a little. We're broadening out. Drew and I are playing through The Last of Us. This will be the first time that I play through this game in its entirety. And I got him supporting me because...
Moral support.
Yeah, moral support, because I've tried playing this game before, and for some reason it just didn't do it for me. So I want to experience it, though. I want to know what I'm missing.
Yeah, maybe with a fanboy next to you. What's up?
Yeah. Hey, you take good care of my game now, Ryan. I
will.
To you because I trust you.
Thank you, Sai, for donating or offering this game up for sacrifice. Maybe this is like my Metroidvania. I keep coming back to the same game, and every time I get a little bit farther in it.
Yeah.
This time you're the upgrade I just acquired, and that's gonna get me through the rest of the game.
Dude, I don't know. I have a feeling I know like what you're trying to get through, but I feel like once the game opens up, you'll feel a lot better.
Yeah, I think that's what the problem is. It didn't grab me fast enough, and from what I understand, it gets a lot better after I get past the spot that I keep getting hung up on.
Yeah, like you'll see,
Yeah. So make sure you keep your eye out for that stuff. As always, you can get a hold of us on the GamerHolics.com, the Facebook group, GamerHolics. You can comment on the YouTube pages, and of course we have the Tumblr where I'm slowly adding all of the content that we've produced on there, and you can ask questions right on there, comment on everything. You can ask anonymous questions. You don't even have to have an account. It's a pretty good setup, and it looks pretty nice too. I like how it looks.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's gonna do it.
LA Drew at LA Drew 87. That is my Twitter.
Oh, Drew, I'll make sure I put that in there.
And let's see. Well, LA Drew 87 is also my PSN.
Okay. And of course, Ryan Shepard _ for me.
Real Cy Cuddy.
Real Cy Cuddy on Twitter.
At Real Cy Cuddy on Twitter.
At Real Cy, not the Real Cy Cuddy, just Real Cy Cuddy.
Real Cy Cuddy. At
Real Cy Cuddy on Twitter. That's Mr. Cyrus Cuddy. And I'm your chagrin on Xbox Live and PSN and Steam and all that good stuff. So see you next time.
Later, guys.
Have a good one, people.